I stared at my grandmother's handwritten letter, now torn into shreds and scattered across the polished mahogany table of the attorney's office. My mother stood over me, her face contorted with rage and disbelief, her chest heaving with each angry breath. The rest of my family sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between my mother's trembling form and my own still expression. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. How dare you? Mom hissed, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of decades of resentment. How dare you make up these lies about my mother? About your grandmother? She would never. Mrs. Harrison. The attorney interrupted, his calm voice cutting through the tension. If you would please take your seat. We haven't finished the reading of the will. I remained silent, my eyes fixed on the torn pieces of what had been my grandmother's final words to me. Words that had just turned my entire family against me in an instant. Words that revealed a truth my mother couldn't bear to hear. The attorney, Mr. Peterson, a man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked at me with sympathy. He had warned me this might happen. Grandma Eleanor had warned me too. Perhaps, he said carefully, adjusting his tie, it would be best if we proceed with the video recording now. Video recording? My Uncle Thomas frowned, looking confused. What video recording? A slow, cold realization spread across my mother's face. What is he talking about, Rebecca? She demanded, her voice suddenly uncertain. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze. Grandma Eleanor made a video will, Mom. The letter was just the beginning. The silence that followed was deafening. Growing up as Eleanor Harrison's granddaughter had been a complicated experience. To the world, my grandmother was a pillar of the community, a successful businesswoman who had built her real estate empire from nothing after my grandfather passed away when I was just a baby. To our family, she was a formidable matriarch who demanded excellence and rarely offered praise. To me, she was something else entirely, a mentor, a confidant, and in many ways more of a mother than my own mother had ever been. My mother, Diana Harrison, was Grandma Eleanor's only child. Their relationship had always been strained, filled with arguments and long periods of silence. Mom resented the high expectations placed on her, the constant push to achieve more, to be more. She had rebelled by marrying young, having me at 20, and creating a life that was deliberately ordinary, the opposite of everything Grandma valued. I was 7 when Grandma Eleanor started inviting me for weekend visits at her sprawling Victorian home on the edge of town. Mom didn't object. She seemed relieved to have time alone with my father. Those weekends became my sanctuary. While other kids my age were watching cartoons, I was learning about property values, investment strategies, and negotiation tactics from a woman who had outmaneuvered men in the business world for decades. The world won't hand you anything, Rebecca, she would tell me as we sat in her study, reviewing contracts or discussing market trends. You have to be smarter, work harder, and never show your hand until you're ready to win. By 16, I was helping her manage properties. By 18, I had started my own small rental business with her guidance. By 25, I had expanded into commercial real estate, following in her footsteps but carving my own path. My mother watched my growing relationship with Grandma Eleanor with a mixture of resentment and relief. Resentful that I had the connection with her mother that she never had, but relieved that the burden of Grandma's expectations had shifted to me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When Grandma was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, the doctors gave her 3 months. She lived for 5, stubborn and sharp-minded until the end. During those final months, our bond grew even stronger. I visited her daily, managing her business affairs and sitting with her for hours as she shared stories from her life, many I had never heard before. It was during one of these visits, just 3 weeks before she passed, that she first mentioned the video will. Rebecca, she had said, her once strong voice now frail but her eyes as keen as ever. There are things I need to tell everyone, truths that have been buried too long, but I know how your mother will react, how Thomas and the others will respond. I had held her hand, its papery skin cool beneath my fingers. What truths, Grandma? She shook her head slowly. Not yet. But I've made arrangements with Peterson. There will be a letter for you and a video for everyone. Her grip tightened suddenly. Promise me you'll be strong when the time comes. They won't understand at first, especially your mother. I had promised, not understanding the weight of what I was agreeing to. Grandma Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning. I was there, having spent the night in the chair beside her bed. My mother arrived 2 hours later, her eyes red but dry. We barely spoke as the funeral arrangements were made. The service was well attended, a testament to Grandma's impact on the community. Business associates, friends, and even competitors came to pay their respects. Through it all, I felt numb, going through the motions while trying to process the loss of the person who had shaped me into who I was. Mom seemed distant, almost relieved in a way that made my heart ache for both of them, for the relationship they should have had but never did. 1 week after the funeral, Mr. Peterson called to schedule the reading of the will. All family members should be present, he had emphasized, his tone serious. Mrs. Harrison was very specific about that. Which led us to this moment, sitting in the attorney's office, the torn pieces of Grandma's letter to me scattered across the table, and the revelation of a video will hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Before we proceed, I want to clarify that Eleanor Harrison was of sound mind when she recorded this video 3 weeks before her passing. I was present, along with a medical professional who verified her mental competence. He looked pointedly at my mother. What you are about to see and hear represents Mrs. Harrison's final wishes and statements, legally documented and binding. My mother sank back into her chair, her momentary triumph at destroying the letter fading as she realized there was more to come, something she couldn't tear up or silence. Peterson pulled out a laptop from his briefcase, opening it and connecting it to a larger screen mounted on the wall of the conference room. The family watched in tense silence. My mother, my Uncle Thomas and his wife Patricia, their adult children, my cousins Michael and Sarah, and me, the lone representative of my immediate family since my father had passed away 5 years ago. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Grandma Eleanor, propped up in her hospital bed, looking frail but with that familiar determined set to her jaw. Her silver hair was neatly combed, and she wore her favorite blue cardigan over her hospital gown. She looked directly into the camera, and I felt a pang in my chest, as if she was looking right at me. If you're watching this, she began, her voice stronger than it had been in her final days, then I've finally lost the one battle I couldn't win. First, let me say that I've lived my life on my own terms, and I have few regrets. But those I do have, I wish to address now. She shifted slightly, wincing with discomfort before continuing. Diana, she said, looking straight ahead as if she could see my mother's face. My only child. Our relationship has been difficult. For that, I accept my share of the blame. I pushed you too hard, expected too much, and failed to see that your dreams were different from mine. I was not the mother you needed, and for that I am truly sorry. I glanced at my mother, whose face had gone pale. In all my life, I had never heard Grandma Eleanor apologize to her. But, Grandma continued, her tone hardening slightly, what you've told the family about your father, about your childhood, has not been the truth. And it's time for that truth to come out. My mother made a small, choked sound. Thomas, Grandma addressed my uncle next. You've believed for 40 years that your father, my Harold, left us with nothing but debts and a failing business, that I built this empire from scratch while raising Diana alone. That's the story Diana has told, the story I allowed to stand, because the truth was too painful. The room was completely still now, everyone leaning forward slightly, caught in the gravity of Grandma Eleanor's words. The truth, she said, pausing to take a labored breath, is that Harold was a brilliant businessman who built a solid foundation for everything I later achieved. He didn't abandon us or gamble away our security. He died protecting a young employee during a robbery at one of our properties. I heard my Uncle Thomas's sharp intake of breath. This contradicted everything we had been told about my grandfather. Diana was only 8, Grandma continued. She was there when it happened, hiding under a desk. The trauma, it changed her. When she recovered, she had created a different story, one where her father had abandoned us. The therapists advised me to let her hold on to this version until she was stronger, but the right moment to correct it never seemed to come. As the years passed, the lie became our reality. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Stop this," she demanded, her voice shaking. This is cruel fiction, a final attempt to control the narrative even from the grave." Mr. Peterson paused the video, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "Mrs. Thompson, your mother anticipated this reaction. There is documentation to support everything she's saying. Police reports, newspaper articles, and therapy records that she kept sealed all these years." He reached into a folder and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local businessman dies heroically during robbery." Beneath it was a photo of a handsome man in his early 30s, my grandfather, looking remarkably like my Uncle Thomas. My mother stared at the clipping, her hand covering her mouth. This can't be." "Mom," I said softly, standing and moving toward her. "Maybe we should listen to the rest." She looked at me with such betrayal in her eyes that I nearly stepped back. "You knew about this," she accused. "She told you, didn't she? The two of you, always whispering, always excluding me." "I didn't know the details," I said truthfully. "Grandma only told me there were things you needed to hear from her directly. That's why she made the video." My Uncle Thomas took the newspaper clipping with trembling hands. "I was only 5 when he supposedly left. I barely remember him." He looked up at my mother. "Diana, why would you create such a story? Why tell us he abandoned us?" My mother sank back into her chair, suddenly looking much older than her 52 years. I don't remember it happening like that," she whispered. "Dad left us. He left because that was easier to accept than watching him die." Grandma Eleanor's voice continued as Mr. Peterson resumed the video. "I made a terrible mistake in allowing that story to stand, in not getting you the help you needed to face the truth. By the time I realized how deeply you believed your version of events, you were a teenager, angry and rebellious, and any attempt I made to speak about your father only widened the gulf between us." Grandma's face on the screen showed more emotion than I had often seen in life: regret, sorrow, and a desperate desire to be understood. "I threw myself into the business he left behind, grew it beyond what even Harold might have imagined. Work became my refuge from grief, and from my failure as a mother. The more Diana pulled away, the more I focused on success, on legacy." She shifted again, closing her eyes briefly as if gathering strength. "Which brings me to the matter of inheritance. Harold left a solid foundation, but what exists today, the Harrison Real Estate Group and all its holdings, represents decades of my labor, my vision, and eventually, the contributions of my granddaughter, Rebecca." My cousins exchanged glances at this, and I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach. This was the part one had been dreading. "I have provided for all of you," Grandma continued. "Thomas, Michael, Sarah, you will each receive a property and a cash settlement, as outlined in the written will. Diana, you will receive the family home and a significant portion of my investment portfolio." This was standard, expected, though the revelation about my grandfather had already thrown everything into chaos. But I knew what was coming next, and from the way my mother's shoulders had tensed, I think she did too. The Harrison Real Estate Group, however, with all its assets, management responsibilities, and controlling interest, I leave to Rebecca. Grandma's voice was firm, without a hint of doubt. "She has worked alongside me for years, learning the business from the ground up, contributing ideas that have helped us grow even as I became less active. She has earned this not through birthright but through dedication and talent." The room erupted then. My uncle's protests, my cousins, surprised exclamations, and cutting through it all, my mother's voice cold and hard. Of course you would do this. It wasn't enough to turn my daughter against me, to make her your protégée. You had to ensure your final act would be to elevate her above everyone else, above your own child." Mr. Peterson paused the video again, raising his hands for quiet. "Please, there's more." Mrs. Harrison addresses these concerns. When the room had settled, he resumed playback. Grandma Eleanor's expression had softened slightly. "I know this decision will cause pain and perhaps anger. Diana, I can already imagine your reaction. But this isn't about favoritism or punishment. It's about entrusting the company to the person who has demonstrated both the ability and the desire to lead it." She leaned closer to the camera. "The letter Rebecca received, which I suspect may not survive the reading of this will," here she gave a small, knowing smile that made my heart ache with missing her, "contains my personal words to her. The video continues with specific instructions that only she needs to hear. Mr. Peterson will provide that portion privately." Grandma Eleanor straightened, summoning dignity despite her frailty. "I leave this world with regrets, but also with pride in what I've built, and in the capable hands I'm leaving it to. I ask only that you try to understand my decisions, even if you cannot immediately accept them. And perhaps in time, the truth will help heal what has been broken for too long." The screen went black and the silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Peterson closed the laptop. "That concludes the portion of the video will intended for the family as a whole. There are documents for each of you detailing your specific inheritances." He began distributing folders, his movements deliberate and calm in the midst of the emotional storm brewing in the room. My mother was the first to speak. "This is a farce," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I'll contest it. All of it. The company should rightfully come to me, her only child." Mr. Peterson regarded her steadily. "Mrs. Thompson, I must advise you that your mother anticipated this response. The will has been carefully constructed to withstand legal challenges. Additionally, there is significant documentation showing Ms. Rebecca's involvement in the company's operations and growth over the past decade." "I don't care," my mother spat. "She manipulated Rebecca, just like she tried to manipulate me my entire life. This isn't over." My Uncle Thomas was still staring at the newspaper clipping. "Diana," he said quietly, "I think we need to address what Eleanor said about Father first. If what she said is true—" "It's not." My mother cut him off. "It's just another one of her manipulations. Another way to control the narrative, to make herself the hero and me the villain." She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "And you? How long have you been planning this with her? How long have you been plotting behind my back to steal what should be mine?" The accusation stung, but I kept my voice level. "I didn't plan anything, Mom. Grandma made her own decisions. I worked with her because I loved the business, because I wanted to learn from her. She never promised me the company. It was her choice. A choice she made because you played the perfect granddaughter while I—" She stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what she was about to say. "While you what, Mom?" I asked softly. "While you rejected everything she tried to give you? While you painted her as the villain in every story you told?" My cousins were watching this exchange with uncomfortable expressions, clearly caught between family loyalty and the shocking revelations of the day. Mr. Peterson intervened. "Perhaps it would be best if everyone took some time to process this information. Review your documents. Consult with your own legal advisors if you wish. Ms. Rebecca, if you could stay behind for the private portion of the video will." My mother gathered her purse and the folder she'd been given, her movements stiff with anger. "This isn't over," she repeated, looking directly at me. "Your grandmother may have had the last word today, but I'll have mine." As she headed for the door, my Uncle Thomas reached for her arm. "Diana, wait. We need to talk about Father. About what really happened." She shook off his hand. "Not now, Thomas. Maybe not ever." The others filed out after her, my cousins giving me awkward nods, caught between their parents, obvious dismay and their uncertainty about how to treat me now. Only my Aunt Patricia paused, touching my shoulder lightly. "Eleanor always spoke highly of you," she said quietly. "Whatever happens next, remember that." Then they were gone, and I was alone with Mr. Peterson and the weight of what had just occurred. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. I nodded, though in truth, I felt hollowed out. I knew it would be difficult, but I didn't expect. For your mother to destroy the letter before hearing the whole story? He suggested gently. Actually, Grandma predicted that exactly, I said with a sad smile. That's why she made a copy. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, identical to the one my mother had torn apart. Mr. Peterson looked surprised, then chuckled softly. Eleanor always was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. That she was, I agreed, feeling a wave of grief and pride mingled together. So there's more to the video? He nodded, reopening the laptop. A private message, just for you. And instructions about something Eleanor called the contingency plan. She was very specific that this was only for your ears. As he set up the video again, I smoothed my hand over the copied letter in my lap. I had already read it multiple times since Grandma had given it to me the day before she died. It contained her private words of encouragement, her belief in my abilities, and her hope that I would find a way to heal the family rifts that had existed for so long. What I didn't know was what this contingency plan might be, or how I was supposed to mend decades of misunderstanding and resentment, especially now that I had become, in my mother's eyes, the final betrayal. The screen flickered back to life, showing Grandma Eleanor exactly as before, but this time it felt different, more intimate. This message was just for me, and as she began to speak, I leaned forward, ready to receive her final guidance, her last gift to me beyond the material inheritance that had just torn my family apart. Rebecca, she said, her eyes seeming to meet mine across the divide of time and death, if you're watching this alone now, then everything has happened as I feared it might. Your mother has rejected the truth, rejected my decision, and possibly rejected you as well. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears at how accurately she had predicted today's events. But I haven't just left you a company, dear one, Grandma continued, a new resolve strengthening her voice. I've left you the tools to finally heal our family. And it begins with understanding the truth about the past. All of it, not just what I shared in the family video. She settled back against her pillows, and for the first time, I noticed a small leather-bound book in her hands. Her journal, the one she had carried with her for as long as I could remember. The contingency plan, she said, holding up the journal, starts here. Rebecca, Grandma Eleanor continued, her eyes fixed on the camera with an intensity that transcended the screen. This journal contains the full story, not just about your grandfather's death, but about everything that came after. The choices I made, the mistakes, the victories. I've documented it all. She opened the leather-bound book, revealing pages filled with her distinctive handwriting. In the safety deposit box at First National, under your name, I added you as an authorized user last month. You'll find this journal and other documents. Letters between your grandfather and me. The original police reports. Newspaper articles. And photographs. So many photographs that I kept hidden away, because they were too painful for Diana to see. I wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility she was placing on my shoulders. This wasn't just about inheriting a business empire. It was about inheriting a family's buried truth. Your mother believes I favored you because you were compliant, because you admired me in ways she never did, Grandma said, a sad smile crossing her face. But the truth is much simpler. I saw in you what I once saw in Harold. A natural instinct for business, yes, but more importantly, a capacity to see beyond yourself, to build rather than merely acquire. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Diana never wanted the business, Rebecca. What she wanted was my attention, my approval, things I was too broken to give after Harold died. By the time I recognized my failure, the damage was done. She had crafted her identity around rejecting everything I stood for. Grandma shifted, grimacing slightly with pain. The company is yours because you earned it, but also because it would destroy Diana to run it. She knows this, deep down, though she'll never admit it. Her challenging the will is about punishment. Punishing me for perceived wrongs, punishing you for the relationship we shared. Her expression softened. But there's something your mother doesn't know yet, something I've arranged that may finally break through the walls she's built. In the deposit box, you'll find a sealed envelope marked Contingency. Inside are instructions for accessing a trust I established years ago, one that Diana knows nothing about. My curiosity piqued. What could Grandma possibly have arranged that she believed might heal decades of hurt? This trust, she continued, contains funds set aside from your grandfather's life insurance policy, money I never touched, that I allowed to grow for over 40 years. According to the records Diana has seen, this money was used to pay off business debts after Harold died. Another fiction I maintained. She closed the journal and held it close to her chest. The trust is in Diana's name, but with a condition. She can only access it after watching a second video, one I recorded before this illness took hold. A video where I take her through the actual events of that day, with the help of documents and photographs she's never seen. Grandma's expression became determined. I couldn't reach her in life, Rebecca. Perhaps in death, with you as my messenger, the truth can finally set her free. Set all of us free from the weight of secrets and misunderstandings. She leaned forward, her face filling the screen. I'm trusting you with this because you understand something crucial that Diana never grasped. Business is important, but family is everything. The real legacy isn't the buildings or the bank accounts. It's the people we love, the connections we nurture or neglect. It won't be easy, she warned. Diana will resist. Thomas will waver between truth and the comfortable lie he's lived with for decades. But you have the strength to see this through. The strength I should have had years ago. The video continued for several more minutes as Grandma outlined specific details about the trust, about documents I would need, about strategies for approaching my mother when she was most likely to listen rather than react. It was like receiving a final masterclass from her, not in business this time, but in the more complex art of healing a fractured family. When the screen finally went dark, I sat in silence, the weight of her final mission settling over me. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat gently. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, he said, closing the laptop. Formidable in business, but also in her determination to make things right, even if it came too late for her to witness. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment as I processed everything I'd learned. Finally, I asked, did you know about my grandfather, about what really happened? Not until recently, he admitted. I've been your grandmother's attorney for 20 years, but she only shared the full story when she began planning this elaborate will. She was determined to set the record straight. Did she really believe this would heal anything? I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. You saw how my mother reacted. She's already convinced this is just another manipulation. Peterson smiled sadly. Eleanor had no illusions about the difficulty of what she was asking you to do, but she believed in you, perhaps more than you believe in yourself right now. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small brass key. The safety deposit box, he explained, placing it on the table between us. Everything you need is there, according to your grandmother. I took the key, its weight in my palm feeling disproportionate to its size, much like the responsibility I now carried. What would you do? I asked him suddenly. If you were in my position? He considered the question carefully. I would remember that beneath all the anger and accusations, there's a daughter who lost her father traumatically, a mother who lost her husband violently, and decades of misunderstanding built on an attempt to protect a child from unbearable truth. He gathered his papers, and I would proceed with compassion, even when met with resistance. As I left the attorney's office, I stepped into bright sunshine that felt at odds with the emotional storm I'd just weathered. My phone was already filling with missed calls and text messages, from my mother, from Uncle Thomas, even from my cousins. I ignored them all for now. I needed time to think, to plan my next steps carefully. Instead of heading home, I drove directly to First National Bank. If I was going to take on this mission, I needed to understand exactly what Grandma had left for me to work with. The safety deposit box contained exactly what she had promised. The leather journal, now aged and worn at the edges, a thick manila envelope marked Contingency in Grandma's bold handwriting, a smaller envelope containing the key to what I assumed was the video mentioned in her message, and a vintage photo album with a faded blue cover. It was the photo album that drew my attention first. I opened it there in the private viewing room provided by the bank, and felt my breath catch. The first photograph showed a young couple on their wedding day, Grandma Eleanor, looking radiant in a fitted 1950s wedding dress, and beside her, the man from the newspaper clipping. My grandfather, Harold Harrison, handsome in his dark suit, looking at his bride with undisguised adoration. I turned page after page, witnessing a family history I had never seen. My grandparents in front of their first small office building with a hand-painted Harrison Real Estate sign. My mother, as a toddler, being swung between them, her face alight with laughter, family picnics, Christmas mornings, ordinary moments captured and preserved, telling the story of a happy family before tragedy struck. Near the end of the album, the photos changed subtly. My grandfather appeared more serious, the carefree smiles replaced by determined looks as he stood in front of larger buildings, shaking hands with business associates. The final photo showed him outside a brick office building, arm around a young man in his early 20s. On the back, in Grandma's handwriting, Harold and Michael Prescott, opening day of the West Side property, June 1973. 2 weeks later, according to the newspaper clipping, Harold Harrison would die protecting Michael Prescott during an armed robbery at that very building. I carefully packed everything back into the safety deposit box, except for the journal, which I decided to read first before approaching anyone. Knowledge was power, and I needed every advantage if I was going to navigate the emotional minefield that lay ahead. That evening, alone in my apartment, I began reading Grandma Eleanor's journal. It began on the day of Harold's death and continued for decades, an intimate chronicle of grief, determination, and regret. Her early entries were raw with pain and focused on my mother's response to the trauma. Diana hasn't spoken since it happened. The doctors say she's in shock. She keeps drawing pictures of Harold walking away, leaving us behind. Dr. Myers says she's created this narrative as a protection, that seeing her father murdered was too much for her young mind to process. He advises playing along with her version until she's stronger. God help me, I don't know what to do. I can barely hold myself together, let alone help her through this. Later entries documented my mother's gradual acceptance of her altered reality, and Grandma's growing concern about correcting it. Diana spoke about Harold again today, told Thomas that Daddy left because he didn't love us enough to stay. Thomas is so young, he just accepts what his sister tells him. I tried to gently correct her, but she became hysterical. Dr. Myers says pushing the truth could cause a significant setback. How long do I let this continue? At what point does protection become deception? As the years progressed, the journal revealed how the lie had become entrenched, how opportunities to correct it slipped away, and how my grandmother threw herself into building the business as both a distraction from grief and a tribute to her husband's memory. 20 years today since Harold died. Diana is getting married next month, still believing her father abandoned us. The right moment to tell her the truth never came, and now it seems impossible. She has built her entire identity around rejecting what she sees as Harold's legacy, his unreliability, his selfishness, all qualities he never possessed. How do I tell her now that everything she believes about her father, about her childhood, is a fiction I allowed to stand? The most painful entries concerned my mother's ongoing estrangement and Grandma's growing relationship with me. Rebecca reminds me so much of Harold, sometimes it takes my breath away. She has his eye for potential, his way of connecting with people. Diana sees it too, I think, and it confuses her. She alternates between pushing Rebecca toward me, "You two are so alike, you should spend more time together," and pulling her away, as if afraid of what might develop between us. Does she sense, somehow, that Rebecca embodies the truth she spent a lifetime denying? I read until dawn, absorbing decades of family history, understanding for the first time the complex web of love, trauma, and misunderstanding that had shaped us all. By the time I closed the journal, I had a clearer sense of what needed to be done, and the near impossibility of achieving it. My phone had continued buzzing throughout the night. Most recent was a text from Uncle Thomas. "We need to talk. About father, about everything." Diana won't answer my calls. I texted back, suggesting we meet for lunch. One step at a time, I thought. Start with the person most likely to listen. Uncle Thomas was already waiting when I arrived at the quiet cafe we had agreed on. He looked tired, the events of the previous day having left visible marks on his face. "Rebecca," he said, standing as I approached. The hug he gave me was awkward but genuine. "Thank you for meeting me." Once we were seated and had ordered, he wasted no time. "I've been up all night thinking about what your grandmother said. About Father. About Diana." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "I was so young when it happened, I barely remember him. All my life, I've believed what Diana told me, that he left us, that Mother built everything from nothing." "I know," I said gently. "It's a lot to process." He leaned forward. "Is it true? Do you have proof beyond that newspaper clipping?" I hesitated, deciding how much to reveal. "I have Grandma's journal," I said finally. "And there's more documentation in a safety deposit box. Photos. Police reports. It all supports what she said in the video." He sat back, looking stunned despite having suspected this answer. Why would Diana create such a fiction? And why would Mother allow it to stand all these years? I shared what I had learned from the journal, about the trauma, the medical advice, the moments that slipped away until the lie became too entrenched to easily correct. "So our entire family history is built on a misunderstanding?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Not entirely," I said carefully. "Grandma did build the business into what it is today. She was as remarkable as we always believed. But she didn't start from nothing, and she wasn't abandoned. She was a widow, trying to protect her traumatized daughter while grieving her husband." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Diana needs to know this," he said finally. "Really know it, with evidence she can't dismiss." "That's what Grandma thought too," I replied. "She left instructions, a way to potentially reach Mom. But I'll need your help." As I outlined what I had learned from the private portion of the video will, Thomas's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. "It might work," he admitted. "But Diana is stubborn. And right now, she sees you as the enemy, the one who got the company she believes should have been hers." "I know," I acknowledged. "That's why we need to approach this carefully." Grandma suggested waiting until the initial shock and anger subsides before presenting the trust information. Thomas nodded slowly. "Meanwhile, I can try to talk to her about Father. Now that I know what to look for, maybe I can get her to remember." He paused. "The company, though. Are you really prepared to take it on?" "It's an enormous responsibility." The question caught me off guard. With everything else happening, I had barely had time to process the practical implications of inheriting the Harrison Real Estate Group. "I've been working in the business for years," I said. "I know the operations, the staff, the properties. But leading it entirely? I'm not sure anyone is ever fully prepared for that." Thomas smiled slightly. "You sound like Mother. She always said the key to success was acknowledging what you didn't know, then finding the right people to fill those gaps." "That's the plan," I agreed. "And I want you to know, this doesn't have to change your role in the company if you don't want it to. Grandma valued your contributions in client relations. That position is still yours if you want it." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Thank you. I do enjoy that aspect of the business." He hesitated. "What about Diana? Assuming she eventually accepts all this. Mode, will there be a place for her?" It was a question I had been pondering since reading the will. "If she wants it," I said carefully. "But given our history and her feelings about the business, I'm not sure she would." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "One step at a time, I suppose. First, we need to help her face the truth about Father. The rest can follow." As we parted, I felt a small spark of hope. Uncle Thomas was an ally now, or at least not an active opponent. It was a beginning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. During the day, I immersed myself in learning the full scope of the Harrison Real Estate Group's operations, meeting with department heads, reviewing current projects, and assuring nervous employees that the transition would be smooth. Evenings were spent poring over Grandma's journal and the other documents from the safety deposit box, building a more complete understanding of our family's true history. My mother maintained her silence, refusing my calls and responding to my messages only through her attorney, a sharp-voiced woman named Elaine Masters, who delivered terse updates about the planned challenge to the will. Uncle Thomas reported limited success in his attempts to engage her about our grandfather. She listens, he told me during one of our regular check-ins, but then changes the subject or ends the call. It's like she physically cannot stay with the topic. Trauma responses can be powerful, I said, remembering passages from Grandma's journal about similar patterns in my mother's childhood. We need to be patient. 6 weeks after the reading of the will, I stood outside my mother's house, gathering my courage. The modest 2-story colonial where I had grown up looked exactly as it always had. Immaculate flower beds, freshly painted shutters, an American flag by the door. My mother had always created perfect exteriors, while the interior reality was considerably more complicated. It had taken all this time to get her to agree to meet with me. Uncle Thomas had finally managed the impossible, convincing her that regardless of her feelings about the inheritance, there were things she needed to see, things about her father that couldn't be dismissed. Remember, he had coached me that morning on the phone. Don't lead with the trust. That will feel like manipulation to her. Start with the photos, the journal entries. Help her see the truth first. I rang the doorbell, clutching the vintage photo album and a USB drive containing the video Grandma had left specifically for my mother. My heart pounded as I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there she stood. Diana Thompson, my mother, looking thinner than when I'd last seen her, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd been sleeping poorly. Her expression was guarded, revealing nothing of her thoughts at seeing me on her doorstep. "Mom," I said softly. She didn't respond immediately, just stepped back to allow me inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and coffee, familiar scents from childhood that triggered an unexpected wave of nostalgia. "Thomas said you have something to show me," she said, leading me to the living room. Her voice was formal, as if addressing a stranger. "He was quite insistent that I hear you out." "I do," I confirmed, taking a seat on the couch while she chose the armchair opposite, maintaining physical distance that mirrored the emotional gulf between us. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm still proceeding with the challenge to the will," she stated, as if I might have come to negotiate. "I know. That's not why I'm here." I placed the photo album on the coffee table between us. "This is about Grandpa Harold, about what really happened." Her posture stiffened. "I've told Thomas I'm not interested in discussing Mother's fabricated version of events." "It's not fabricated, Mom." I gently pushed the album toward her. "Please, just look. These are photos Grandma kept hidden because they were too painful for you to see." Curiosity warred with resistance on her face. Finally, she reached for the album, opening it cautiously as if it might contain something dangerous. I watched as she turned the pages, her expression shifting from skeptical to confused to something more vulnerable as she progressed through images of the happy family she had once been part of. I don't remember any of this," she murmured, touching a photo of herself as a small child, perched on her father's shoulders at what appeared to be a county fair. "You were very young," I said gently, "and according to Grandma's journal, the trauma of what happened affected your memories." She looked up sharply. "Journal? What journal?" I pulled Grandma Eleanor's leather-bound journal from my bag and explained how I had found it. "She documented everything, Mom. From the day Grandpa died through decades of building the business, raising you and Uncle Thomas, and her regrets about how she handled the truth." My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the journal. "What truth? That she invented a heroic death story to make herself look better?" "No," I said firmly. "That she protected a traumatized 8-year-old girl by temporarily allowing her to believe a story that was easier to accept than watching her father die violently." Mom's face paled. "I didn't. I wasn't there when he left. I was at school." I leaned forward. "Mom, you were there when he was killed. You were hiding under a desk during the robbery. You saw everything." She shook her head violently. "No, that's not what happened. He left us. He walked out. I remember. She stopped abruptly, her hand going to her temple as if warding off pain. What do you remember exactly? I asked softly. Him walking away, she whispered. Down a long hallway, not looking back. That was at the office building, I said carefully. You were visiting him at work. The robbers came in, and he told you to hide. You saw him from under the desk, walking toward the front of the building, toward the danger, to protect his employee. She stared at me, something shifting in her eyes. How could you possibly know that? It's all documented, I explained. Police reports, newspaper articles, witness statements. And Grandma Eleanor recorded a video for you, explaining everything she couldn't tell you in life. I held up the USB drive. Would you be willing to watch it? Just the two of us right now? For a moment, I thought she would refuse. Then, wordlessly, she stood and walked to the television, taking the drive from my hand and inserting it into the media player below the screen. The video began with Grandma Eleanor sitting in her study, looking healthy and strong, clearly recorded before her illness. She was surrounded by documents, photographs, and newspaper clippings spread across her desk. Diana, she began, her voice steady and clear. If you're watching this, then I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth, though too late for us to discuss it face to face. I've asked Rebecca to deliver this to you when the time is right. My mother sat rigidly on the edge of her chair, arms crossed defensively across her chest. What I'm about to share isn't easy, Grandma continued. It's the story of the worst day of our lives, a day that shaped everything that came after. She picked up a photograph, the same one I had seen of my grandfather with the young employee, Michael Prescott. This was taken 2 weeks before Harold died. That's Michael, the new property manager he had just hired for the West Side building. Methodically, compassionately, Grandma Eleanor laid out the events of that day in June 1973. How my mother had been out of school with a mild fever but had begged to visit her father at his new building. How Harold had set her up with coloring books in his office while he conducted business. How 2 armed men had entered, demanding the cash from the day's rent collections. Michael was young, impulsive, Grandma explained. He tried to trigger the silent alarm. One of the robbers saw him, raised his gun. Harold pushed Michael out of the way and was shot twice in the chest. My mother's breathing had become shallow, her eyes fixed on the screen. You were under the desk, Diana. The police found you there, in shock, not speaking. When the paramedics tried to bring you out, you kept saying, Daddy walked away. Over and over. Grandma's face on the screen showed decades of pain and regret. The therapist said your mind had created a protective story, that your father had left voluntarily rather than been taken violently. Dr. Myers advised us to go along with your version until you were stronger, until you could handle the truth. She picked up what appeared to be medical records, but each time I tried to introduce the reality, you would become hysterical. As you got older, the story became more entrenched. By the time you were a teenager, you had built an entire identity around being the daughter of a man who had abandoned his family. My mother made a small sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. I made a terrible mistake, Grandma admitted, looking directly into the camera. I chose what seemed easier in the moment, letting you believe your version of events, rather than getting you the help you needed to face the painful truth. By protecting you from one kind of pain, I allowed a different kind to take root and grow. The video continued as Grandma systematically presented evidence, the police reports, the medical records, newspaper accounts, and finally, a yellowed letter. This was in Harold's desk, she said, holding it up. A life insurance policy he had taken out just 3 months before he died. He was expanding the business, taking calculated risks, always thinking ahead, always protecting us. She looked down at the document. $1 million. An enormous sum in 1973. Money that allowed me to grow the business even through economic downturns, to provide for you and Thomas, to build what became the Harrison Real Estate Group. At this, my mother turned to me, shock evident on her face. 1 million? But she always said we were nearly bankrupt after he left, that she built everything from nothing. Because that's what you believed happened, I explained gently. She maintained the fiction to protect you. On screen, Grandma Eleanor was opening a ledger. This is the original account where the insurance money was deposited. I've maintained it separately all these years, allowing the funds to grow. It's become what I call the Harrison Legacy Trust. She closed the ledger, her expressions solemn. Diana, this trust exists in your name. It represents your father's final gift to you, not abandonment, but protection and provision, even beyond his death. The funds are substantial now, after decades of growth. My mother's hands covered her mouth, tears streaming unchecked down her face. To access this trust, Grandma continued, you need only acknowledge the truth. Not to me. I'll be gone by the time you see this. But to yourself. To Thomas. To Rebecca. Your father was a hero who died protecting someone else. He loved you more than his own life. The screen went black, and silence filled the room, broken only by my mother's quiet weeping. I moved to sit beside her, hesitantly placing my hand on her shoulder. To my surprise, she didn't pull away. All these years, she whispered. All these years I believed. She couldn't finish the sentence. It wasn't your fault, I said softly. You were a child experiencing trauma. The mind does what it needs to protect itself. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. And Mother? She let me believe this lie for my entire life. She made a mistake, I acknowledged. One she regretted deeply. The journal is full of her struggles with it. Moments when she almost told you but couldn't find the right way, couldn't risk your mental health. By the time you were an adult, the lie had become the foundation of your relationship with her, with the memory of your father, with everything. My mother stood abruptly, walking to the window and staring out at the carefully tended garden. I need to process this, she said, her voice steadier now. I need time. Of course, I replied, standing to leave. Take all the time you need. The journal and photos are yours to keep. Uncle Thomas and I are here when you're ready to talk more. As I reached the door, her voice stopped me. Rebecca? I turned. Yes, thank you, she said quietly. For bringing this to me. For persisting. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. Not yet, but it was a beginning. The following weeks brought gradual, cautious changes. My mother dropped the challenge to the will, calling off her attorney with a terse message that, quote, family matters are being resolved privately. She began meeting regularly with Uncle Thomas, poring over the photo albums and documents, piecing together the true history of our family. I gave them space, focusing on running the company while remaining available whenever they reached out with questions or insights. It was a delicate balance, being present without pushing, supportive without intruding. 3 months after I had shown my mother the video, she called and asked if I would meet her at Grandma Eleanor's grave. It was an unexpected request, but I agreed immediately. The cemetery was peaceful that autumn afternoon, maple leaves in brilliant red and gold drifting across the manicured lawns. My mother was already there when I arrived, standing before the elegant granite headstone that marked Grandma Eleanor's final resting place. As I approached, I noticed she had placed fresh flowers. Not the formal arrangements usually sent to funerals and grave sites, but a vibrant, almost wild bouquet that reminded me of the garden Grandma had tended in her younger years. Mom, I greeted her softly. She turned and I was struck by the change in her. She looked, lighter somehow, as if a burden had been set down. There was gray in her hair that I hadn't noticed before, lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of held pain, but her expression was more open than I had seen it in years. I've been coming here every week, she said, gesturing to the grave, talking to her, telling her all the things I never said while she was alive. That sounds healing, I offered. She nodded. It's strange. I spent most of my life feeling angry at her, feeling misunderstood and unfavored. Now I understand she was just as wounded as I was, in her own way, grieving my father while trying to raise 2 children and run a business. She did the best she could, I said, even if her choices weren't always the right ones. Yes. My mother's gaze was distant, contemplative. I've been thinking about that a lot, how we all make choices that seem right in the moment, only to realize later the consequences we never anticipated. She turned to face me directly. Like how I chose to see your relationship with Mother as a betrayal, rather than the natural connection it was. How I resented the business because I associated it with her choosing work over me, when really it was her way of honoring my father's memory and securing our future. I felt a tightness in my chest, hope mingled with caution. This was more insight and vulnerability than my mother had shown in all my adult life. I've made an appointment with a therapist, she continued. Someone who specializes in childhood trauma and recovered memories. It's time I dealt with what happened that day, with what I actually saw and have been running from all these years. I think that's incredibly brave, I told her sincerely. She smiled faintly. Brave or decades overdue. Either way, it's necessary. She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. I've also been thinking about the company. I tensed slightly, unsure where this was heading. Mother was right to leave it to you, she said simply. You understand it in ways I never did, never wanted to. My challenging the will was about hurt pride, not about any genuine desire to run Harrison Real Estate. Relief washed through me. Thank you for saying that. I've been worried that this would always stand between us. I can't promise there won't be difficult moments ahead, she cautioned. 50 years of misunderstanding doesn't disappear overnight. But I'm trying to see clearly now, to see you clearly, and Mother, and myself. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is what I wanted to give you today. I've signed the paperwork to establish a foundation using the Harrison Legacy Trust. The focus will be trauma counseling for children, helping them process difficult truths rather than creating protective fictions that can damage them for decades. I took the envelope, deeply moved by the gesture. That's perfect, Mom. Grandpa Harold's legacy living on in a way that might have changed everything for you if it had existed back then. And for Mother, she added softly. She carried such guilt for a decision she made trying to protect me. Perhaps this can help other families avoid our mistakes. We stood together in companionable silence for a few moments, the autumn breeze rustling the trees around us. Would you like to get lunch? I finally asked. There's a new cafe near the office. We could talk more. Or not talk at all if you prefer. Just be together. My mother nodded, a genuine smile warming her features. I'd like that very much. As we walked back to our cars, she hesitated, then asked, Would you tell me about the business sometime? Not the numbers or properties, but what you love about it. I'd like to understand that part of you better. I'd like that, I replied, feeling a new connection forming between us. Fragile still, but real. The foundation was launched 6 months later, with both my mother and Uncle Thomas serving on its board alongside trauma specialists and child advocates. We named it the Harold Harrison Foundation for Childhood Healing, with a mission statement that acknowledged how truth, even painful truth, was ultimately less damaging than protective fictions. Grandma Eleanor's journal was published as part of the foundation's educational materials, with my mother's full support. Its honest portrayal of one family's journey through trauma, misunderstanding, and eventual healing became a valuable resource for therapists and families facing similar challenges. The company continued to thrive under my leadership, with a new emphasis on developments that supported community well-being, affordable housing, mixed-use spaces that fostered connection, and investments in historically underserved neighborhoods. On the first anniversary of Grandma Eleanor's death, we gathered at her grave, not just my mother, Uncle Thomas, and me, but the extended family as well. My cousins Michael and Sarah, Uncle Thomas's wife Patricia, and even distant relatives who had known only fragments of our complicated history. My mother placed her customary wild bouquet against the headstone, then straightened to address the assembled family. My mother Eleanor Harrison made difficult choices throughout her life, some wise, some flawed, all made with the intention of protecting those she loved. Today, we honor not just her accomplishments in business, but her final gift to this family, the truth that has allowed us to heal wounds we carried for generations. She turned to me, extending her hand in a gesture of connection. And we honor the messenger she chose to deliver that truth, my daughter Rebecca, who had the courage to persist when it would have been easier to let old resentments stand. As I took her hand, I felt the full circle of our family story, the trauma that had fractured us, the secrets that had maintained those fractures, and the truth that had finally begun to heal them. It hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been anger, resistance, and pain along the way. But standing there surrounded by family, I understood what Grandma Eleanor had meant in her final message to me. The real legacy wasn't the buildings or bank accounts. It was the connections we nurture, the truths we face together, and the healing that becomes possible when we have the courage to see each other clearly. My mother squeezed my hand, and in that simple gesture was the acknowledgement of everything we had survived and everything we were rebuilding together. A family reborn through difficult truth, finding its way toward wholeness after decades of living with comfortable fictions. "She would be proud," my mother whispered. "Of all of us." I nodded, knowing it was true. Grandma Eleanor's final wish had been fulfilled, not through the dramatic revelation of the video will, but through the harder, more meaningful work that had followed, the daily choice to face truth, to extend forgiveness, and to build something new from the ashes of misunderstanding. As we left the cemetery that day, walking together toward a future none of us could have imagined a year earlier, I carried with me the most valuable inheritance of all. Not the company or the properties, but the wisdom that real healing begins with truth, however difficult it may be to face. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.